we have to also come to grips with the problem of evil in the world. That is a reality. That suffering does happen because sin has infiltrated this world and has been passed down generation to generation to generation. We have to know that sin is a part of our lives, and we have to acknowledge, just as Job has, that God doesn't owe us anything. God doesn't owe us anything. The life we experience is by His grace. Even right now, any condition that anyone has is by His grace. And you might say, well, why is that? Because I'm suffering, I'm hurting. My friend is in the hospital right now. I have relatives that have been born with this sickness, that have these illnesses. How is that His grace? God is a perfect God with a perfect standard. And God made a perfect world. And men decided to choose sin instead of Him. And the consequence is that has been passed down through generation to generation. And like Mark said, we have the choice to choose God or to run away from God. But God is merciful in this. Right now, the life that you have and the life that other people have around you, the time He has given us is time for us to see Him. Each moment as it ticks by is a chance for us, every one of us in here, to choose Christ, to follow after Him, to share the gospel with others, for them to follow Him. God didn't make a child destined to hell. The time that you have right now, the time that you have growing up, is an opportunity to know Jesus. The time that you have and the time others have around you is a time for them to know Jesus. You're not cursed with no opportunity to follow after Christ. Christ has given every one of us an opportunity to follow after Him. And He's given us time to know Him. This is the grace of God. Second, God's purpose in allowing tragedy is to see how much we really do need Him. Again, we can get away just in a mundane life, just doing what we do. We're stuck on our schedule. We can get away from actually seeing our necessity for Him in our everyday life. And unlike anything in the world, tragedy stops us dead in our tracks. Unlike anything else, tragedy stops us. So I want to play this video to rekindle some feelings, to rekindle some thoughts, because I think some of us, or most of us in here, were old enough to understand what was going on 14 years ago. I was doing some research, and I found that after this tragedy occurred, unlike any other time, the churches of the United States were flooded. Congregations were flooded. People had questions, had concerns, wanting to know who is God and where is He in this present tragedy. What's going on here? And again, tragedy stops us dead in our tracks when stuff like this happens. And I had found this article entitled, How Faith Has Changed Since 9/11. And this article was written in November of 2001. And I would like to read a couple of portions from this article concerning the effect that this event had on people in their church attendance, them coming to the congregation to worship God or find out who God is, or is God involved and does God care? And then we'll have some announcements really quickly, and then we will close here. So, social analysts point out that people turn to religion in times of crisis and instability. The terrorist attacks on September 11th certainly shattered the stability and comfort of Americans' lives, leading to a surge in church attendance and Bible sales immediately after the attacks. 7 religious behaviors were studied to assume the impact of the 9/11 events. The surge in church attendance has been widely reported, and while current levels of adult attendance are higher than ever before the attack, they are not statistically different than the numbers recorded last November, thus reflecting unusual seasonal increase. So part of their study going on is a seasonal issue. But what they also noticed was that Bible sales went up, that people started paying more attention to what was going on because of the tragedy. Now, that doesn't always necessarily mean that more will come in, because some will leave the church because they see God letting this happen. But new people come in as well because of what happened. So God speaks loudly through tragedy. And when we see and read throughout the Bible, and when we see the world around us as Christians get persecuted, the true ones stand out and they stand firm in their faith. The others fall away. Now, I'm not saying they don't come to the big church, but they don't have a home church that they're plugged into. Some type of biblical community where the church is present. They leave altogether. So it appears that attendance, which nationwide increased perhaps 25% immediately after the attack, is back to normal levels. So after time, after tragedy subsides and people go on with their normal life, we get desensitized to the world around us. But tragedy still stops us in our tracks. The November survey found that 48% of adults were attending on a typical weekend. The types of adults who seemed more inclined to be attending church services 2 months after the attack were women. And it says that men were hardly there at all. Sometimes as men, we really wrestle and struggle with this fact that following after Jesus and being compassionate and trusting and caring and faithful is something that's almost considered weak. But I shared this on Tuesday at Remnant, and I'm going to share it again here. The strongest man will follow after Jesus. The strongest man will let his pride slip to the wayside and follow after Christ. Will get this ego off his shoulders. But the weakest man will continue to pile on ego. Will continue to talk about what he has and what he did and how he's a self-made man. But the strong man will let that ego subside, fall away, and focus on Jesus and follow after him, because that takes more strength than a man fighting, struggling, boasting, showing off, than any of that will ever do. I mean, you look around the room this morning, and we probably see less guys in here than there are girls. And that's a tragedy. That's sad. And I know some people are out for different circumstances and situations, but you go into the main service, same thing. So we as men need to lead other men to Christ and be involved in our workplace, to be present in those conversations that need to happen, to ask how we can pray for others, not to shy away from that and say, well, I'm going to lose my job. Well, this and that. Man, if you're concerned about that, say, hey, you want to go get some coffee? Let's talk about these things. Do that. Use your mind to worship God and ask them, hey, let's be strategic about how we worship God in the workplace, and invite them out of the workplace and talk to them about those things that are of major concern, because we're losing men. We're losing them. And the ones that are attending, they may not be leading well and leading strongly like a man should. And in the tragedy, this goes for all of us in here, men and women included. How are we going to suffer? Are we going to suffer well? Are we going to suffer pointing fingers at God, blaming people? Or are we going to suffer knowing that God is with us? Just as Job worshiped God in the midst of the worst and most tragic event in his life. And he says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So I want to close with this. As we think about tragedy, we think about loss. We have this verse up here on the screen. It says, 1 Thessalonians 4:13, this is for Christians, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brother, about those who are asleep, that they might not grieve as others who do not have hope. We don't grieve as those that don't have hope. We grieve knowing that there is a hope, that there is a promise for us, and that in the midst of tragedy, this is the worst we will ever experience. This life right now is the worst we'll ever experience. And when this life is through, we experience glory and goodness and the presence of God. We have a hope to look forward to. So we grieve not as those not having hope, but as those who do have hope. And we have a greater hope to look forward to. And I pray that we see an urgency, because this life is crazy and chaotic, and there's a lot of suffering and tragedy that goes on. And we see that there's an urgency to share the gospel, to share our story of our life encountering Jesus, and to follow after Jesus so that we might suffer well.